Aegon Targaryen first set foot upon the shores of Westeros on a mild, windswept afternoon when the gulls reeled overhead and the sea lapped placidly at the sands. The day was remarkable for its quiet, unassuming nature, so at odds with the great change that was destined to roll across the seven kingdoms in its wake. On that shoreline, there was no roar of battle, no glint of unsheathed steel, no monstrous wingbeats overhead. There was merely Aegon, clad in an unremarkable gray cloak that might have belonged to any merchant's retainer. He arrived with no fanfare. No trumpets sounded, no grand retinue announced his presence, and no banners fluttered to reveal his crest. No one expected that the young man crossing the surf in scuffed boots was a Targaryen prince from the old line of Valyria, someone who would upend the destiny of an entire continent with words instead of war. He paused there, letting the salt wind coil through his silver hair, tasting the tang of this foreign sea on his lips. Though an onlooker might have seen only a tall, spare figure gazing toward an empty horizon, Aegon felt a fervor within himself, a gentle trembling of certainty. He had grown up among the scraps of Valyrian culture, hearing stories of lost wonders and shattered empires, while the Targaryen name had nearly dwindled into obscurity. The cataclysm of the Doom had forced his ancestors to a small foothold on Dragonstone. Dragonstone was a place of pride and memory, but it was also a place of diminishment. The Targaryen line once boasted dragons, yes, fearsome winged beasts that turned cities to ash. But as the old ways withered after the Doom, so did the Targaryen hold on those mighty creatures. Now there were no dragons, only rumors that once they had soared. And even if a scaly egg still existed, it had lain dormant too long, a vestige of something lost to time. He drew in a deep breath. Westeros was full of potential, chaotic in its division. 7 squabbling kingdoms, each proud, each suspicious of the next. Word had drifted to Dragonstone that the iron-fisted Heron the Black had raised a monstrous fortress near the God's Eye, that Argilac the Arrogant clung to an ancient notion of dominion in the Stormlands, that the Lannisters perched in their rock like gilded lions, while the Reach, the North, the Vale, and Dorne all kept to their traditions and distrustful alliances. Over the years, Aegon had devoured every scrap of news from the mainland. He learned of the tensions that simmered under the surface, and he intuited a truth: war was not the only means of conquest. People used steel when words failed. But if words never failed, if alliances could be spun like a golden tapestry of trust and reciprocity, then might he bind these lands together without unsheathing a single sword? He looked down at his gloved hands. The idea had come to him in his youth as he pored over ancient Valyrian texts that sang of a more enlightened era before the world shattered. Those musty tomes spoke of cunning in trade and marriage alliances, in forging unstoppable coalitions through bonds that transcended petty rivalries. But the Targaryens had always relied on dragons. Aegon thought that reliance had turned them away from the subtler arts. Any man with a great beast at his call might not bother to woo lesser lords with kind words and shared fortunes. Yet for all the stories of Balerion the Black Dread and Vagor, the Targaryens of Aegon's generation possessed not a single living monster to cast shadows across the sky. They had only their name and their cunning. He vowed that if he ever stepped upon Westeros, he would see if those could suffice. At length, he walked away from the surf. A single companion accompanied him now, a woman in an austere dress of black linen. Visenya Targaryen, his elder sister, was as solemn as she was graceful. At a glance, one might mistake her for a simple retainer, for her attire lacked any flamboyant heraldry. Even her face was partly shadowed by the hood of her cloak. But her violet eyes gleamed with a fierce intellect, and her every movement spoke of an inherited mastery of the blade. She was the keeper of old traditions, the more bellicose aspect of their house. There was a reason she had carried the Valyrian steel sword known as Dark Sister all the way from Dragonstone, hidden carefully beneath her cloak. She did not trust to honeyed words alone. "You're certain this is the way?" she asked, casting a pointed glance across the lonely stretch of coastline. "We've no illusions left, dear brother. If we are discovered, the local lords might see us as trifling exiles, or worse, potential usurpers. They would consider us a threat." "Let them consider what they will," Aegon replied, his voice low. "We begin in the smallest way, forging ties where none exist. We will offer what only the Targaryens can, an unaligned perspective. We are neither from the north nor the south. The great houses know we exist but see us as a mere curiosity. If they wish to spurn us, so be it. We'll find others more open to negotiation." Visenya's lips curved in a half-skeptical smile. It is a delicate dance, forging alliances among those who snarl at each other like cornered beasts. We must be ready if words prove weak. Words are never weak, sister, if wielded by the right mind and with the right intention. But yes, steel stands behind them, unseen but present. He flexed his hands, imagining the tapestry he hoped to weave. I've heard rumor that Torrhen Stark in the north is wise beyond his years, that he's more inclined to keep the peace than his forebears. I've heard Mern in the Reach is old and wants to secure his legacy. Cautious men, cautious hearts. We shall see who might welcome a Targaryen envoy first. We must choose carefully. Visenya gestured inland, toward the rolling hills that led to the interior. You sent envoys already in secret. Do you truly believe the lords will gather at your request, with no show of force, no promise other than a handshake across a table? It's not just a handshake, Aegon said. It's the future of their children, their fortunes, their place in history. My letters will speak of unity and, yes, some measure of advantage. If a lord can benefit from trade, from new alliances that bring goods from distant corners of the continent, from a stable arrangement that ensures less coin wasted on war, why wouldn't he come? We Targaryens have one advantage that none of them possess. We come from outside the cycle of grievances. We have no direct quarrel with any house. Our name might be small for now, but let's see if it can grow in the hearts of men seeking more than perpetual conflict. Visenya studied him for a moment, then nodded. There, on that desolate shore, they began their improbable journey. The gulls wheeled overhead one last time, as if in quiet benediction, and the siblings turned their backs on the sea, stepping into Westeros with nothing but a faint hope that words might conquer where dragons once had. They traveled by simple carriage, purchased at an out-of-the-way village where no one recognized the silver-haired newcomers. Aegon insisted on minimal guards, just a handful of loyal men from Dragonstone whom he trusted implicitly. They wore drab cloaks and carried no sigils. They rode in pairs or alone along the roads, never announcing themselves as Targaryens. Caution was paramount, for no one in the Seven Kingdoms looked kindly upon a foreign claimant. Already, rumor trickled through the land of 2 Targaryens come from Dragonstone to treat with lords. But rumor alone was not enough to spark conflict unless some ambitious warlord sensed a weakness. Aegon had to move swiftly yet carefully. As they followed the main road, he gazed out the carriage window at the farmland rolling by. Sheep grazed in distant meadows, a farmer waved, not knowing who traveled in the passing carriage. Aegon returned a small nod. Beneath his calm expression lay an unyielding determination. Here were the people he wished to protect, the small folk, the humble men and women who toiled in the fields, menaced by brigands in times of strife and taxed mercilessly by lords who fought endless border wars. A realm united could offer more than stability. It could offer these people hope that their lives might continue without the fear of a neighboring army marching through their crops. Still, the cynic in Aegon understood how difficult it would be. Each kingdom possessed a proud king or lord paramount, each with a legacy, traditions, and an ingrained suspicion of outsiders. Yet every fortress, every keep, must have some door left ajar for compromise. Even Argilac the arrogant might find reason to treat if offered something he valued more than pride. They ventured first toward the Riverlands. Though it was said Harren the Black had constructed Harrenhal, the greatest castle in the realm, that edifice was rumored to be more a symbol of fear than a seat of diplomacy. Nevertheless, the Riverlands were rife with discontent. The lords there had been ground under Harren's thumb, taxed heavily to fuel his monstrous ambitions. A people desperate for respite might welcome an alternative. But Aegon did not ride up to Harrenhal's black gates demanding audience. That would have been folly. Instead, he set up a modest camp near the crossroads in a place of ceaseless traffic where rumors mingled with travelers from every direction. He sent out discreet invitations sealed only with the initials at, without the Targaryen dragon sigil. Men loyal to lesser lords, knights who had some measure of open-mindedness, were invited to talk, share a meal, and hear a proposition. For days, Aegon and Visenya waited, uncertain if any would come, uncertain if word would leak back to Harren the Black or other paranoid lords. On the 5th day, under a slate-colored sky threatening rain, a small band of armed riders approached the camp. Aegon watched from a distance as his loyal retainers met the band, quietly instructing them to disarm and approach with caution. The riders did not protest but placed their swords aside in a show of good faith. One was a broad-shouldered man with gray streaks in his hair, who introduced himself as Lord Jonas Bracken, a minor but proud lord from the Riverlands. Another was a knight of House Blackwood, ironically enough, traveling with the Bracken retinue in an uneasy truce. With them came a young lord from House Vance. Aegon felt his heart leap to see this microcosm of feuding houses arrive together. Perhaps necessity truly could breed cooperation. They gathered around a plain oak table in a large pavilion where a fire crackled in a brazier. The smell of roasting mutton and fresh bread greeted them, but none reached for the food at first. Instead, their eyes flicked toward Aegon and Visenya, whose cloaks were now thrown back, their silver hair gleaming in the dim light. Jonas Bracken's brows rose, but he made no immediate outcry. The Blackwood Knight studied Visenya's face with curiosity and perhaps a hint of admiration. Aegon spoke without preamble. "My friends, I am Aegon Targaryen. Thank you for answering my invitation." The men exchanged wary glances. Jonas Bracken cleared his throat. "Targaryen, I thought your house was sequestered on Dragonstone. Now I find you here, offering me and my friends a meal? That is unexpected." "I wish for all men to lay aside their expectations," Aegon said calmly. "The times ahead call for new thinking. You and I know well that your lord, Harren the Black, has bled you with his taxes and demands to fortify his monstrous castle. You gain nothing from his ambitions save fear. And you war among yourselves, House Bracken and House Blackwood, for old slights that have festered across generations. Tell me honestly, what do you see in your future if you remain on the path you tread now?" The Blackwood Knight flinched as though a wound had been touched. "The same as ever," he said in a resigned tone. "We fight, sometimes one side emerges with a scrap of farmland, sometimes the other. But the outcome never truly changes. Houses with older grudges than ours have drowned in endless feuds. It is the lot of the Riverlands to be a battleground. Yet you came here together," Visenya noted, watching them closely. "Why?" Lord Bracken sighed. "Because we hear rumors. We hear that a Targaryen prince seeks a new alliance that might temper the worst impulses of Harren the Black. Or at least offer us some recourse. We came in curiosity, yes, but also desperation. We have no illusions you possess an army. We see no warhorses, no warships. But if you offer us something better than living under Harren's yoke or turning on each other, we'll listen." Aegon inclined his head. "I offer a new dream, a united realm, not under the heel of a tyrant, not overshadowed by fear. But I offer it without raising swords. If the local lords in the Riverlands were to stand together, to form a cohesive alliance, you could negotiate for fair treatment from Harren or from any who seeks to oppress you. If we extend that alliance beyond the Riverlands, if we approach the lords of the North, the Vale, the Westerlands, the Reach, Dorne, the Stormlands, if enough of them sign onto a mutual pact of friendship, trade, and non-aggression, then the days of easy conquest will be over. No single tyrant could stand against the combined will of the land." Jonas Bracken regarded him with skeptical eyes. "A lofty notion. But we are scattered. Our mutual distrust is older than Harren's cruelty. What is to stop one side from betraying the other the moment a better offer arises?" Aegon smiled, expecting this question. "True alliances aren't forged merely by words but by benefits. Each house will have a seat at the table where decisions are made. Trade routes and river traffic will open, ensuring prosperity. Tariffs will be standardized. Marriages will seal ties between houses that once feuded. And those who sign onto this alliance will agree to mutual defense. Any aggression against one member is aggression against all. The aggressor's trade will be cut off, their neighbors will shun them until they come to terms. This is how we defeat tyranny, by isolating those who embrace it." There was silence, broken only by the crackling brazier and a faint patter of rain on the pavilion. Then the Blackwood Knight slowly said, "It's quite an idea. But what part does House Targaryen play in all this?" "My house will serve as the neutral mediator," Aegon said, "a sort of overseer, ensuring the pact's terms remain equitable. We have no territorial ambitions beyond forging this union. When disputes arise, we will convene a council to settle them. Think of me as the first among equals, a keeper of the peace, nothing more." Visenya cut in, her tone cool. "If this alliance is to endure, however, you must commit. If you try to hedge or keep a foot in old grudges, you sabotage not only yourselves but the entire concept. Our father always said trust is built on common interests. We trust you are tired enough of bleeding to try something new." Her directness seemed to unsettle them, but the Bracken Lord nodded. "You speak bravely for an outsider. Still, I'd rather try your plan than cower beneath Harren's shadow until my house is bled dry. Perhaps the time has come to set old rivalries aside." Aegon let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. The men took their seats and accepted cups of watered wine. The conversation lasted late into the night. They debated, argued, weighed the risk of trying to contact others without Harren's knowledge. They parted with no firm agreement beyond a vow to keep speaking. But that was enough for Aegon. A vow to keep speaking meant the door was open. The days that followed brought more visitors, though some were more cautious than others. Envoys from House Mallister, House Frey, House Mouton, and other Riverland families filtered in and out of Aegon's quiet camp. Each came with suspicions, demands, and half-formed hopes. Some had no illusions that Harren might retaliate if he sniffed out rebellion. But there was a current of desperation running through them all, a quiet longing for an alternative to endless strife. Aegon's plan was outlandish, uniting the entire continent with negotiations. But might it also be the Riverland's best chance to escape the cycle of conquest that had devoured them time and time again? By the end of the month, Aegon had a series of discreet letters signed by various lords, pledging conditional support for a grand alliance under Targaryen mediation, provided enough other great houses joined to make it viable. If these men were to commit treason in the eyes of Harren, they wanted assurances they would not stand alone. Aegon hid those letters in a secret compartment in his carriage. They were, in a sense, the seeds of a new realm. It was enough to embolden him. He decided that the next move should be forging an understanding with the Stormlands. Argilac the Arrogant was the closest threat, and if he could be convinced to at least remain neutral, the alliance might grow. But a direct approach to Argilac seemed unwise. Instead, Aegon dispatched 2 of his most diplomatic retainers to treat with Argilac's courtiers, gauge the atmosphere. Meanwhile, he and Visenya made ready to travel farther north. He wanted to meet with Torrhen Stark, who was rumored to keep an open mind. They left the Riverlands quietly, ensuring that their presence had not stirred Harren's wrath. As they traveled the winding roads northward, the air grew crisper, the nights longer. Soon they found themselves crossing the neck where bogs and marshes made the road perilous. Crannogmen watched from the mires, suspicious of any travelers. But Aegon's small retinue trudged on, boots squelching in mud, forging ahead toward the wide open spaces of the north. Torrhen Stark, king in the north, was a man of pragmatic temperament, or so rumor said. He kept Winterfell strong and stable. He rarely involved himself in southern disputes, content to let the southern kings bicker among themselves. Yet Aegon suspected a seed of curiosity might dwell in him, for the north always stood apart. Perhaps Torrhen was weary of the notion that the north was a cold, distant land unconnected to the rest of Westeros. Perhaps he, too, might see the wisdom in forging a realm without the constant threat of border clashes. When they finally arrived at Winterfell, having made their presence known in advance, Aegon was struck by the austere majesty of the place. High walls of gray stone, built to endure the fiercest of winters, encircled courtyards bustling with activity. There was no sign that a grand banquet was prepared for them, no flourish or pageantry. Instead, grim-faced guards escorted Aegon, Visenya, and their small party into the great hall where Torrhen Stark awaited them. He sat upon a simple wooden seat, not quite a throne, garbed in dark woolen attire trimmed with fur. His hair was brown-streaked with gray, and his gaze possessed a calm solidity. This was not a man given to flights of fancy. He greeted them politely, though without warmth. Aegon bowed, trying to convey both respect and self-assuredness. "I welcome you to Winterfell, Prince Aegon," Torrhen said in a low voice that seemed to carry authority without effort. "Though I confess I did not expect to see a Targaryen so far north, especially one bearing no retinue of note." Aegon offered a small smile. "I prefer to travel light, your grace. I thank you for receiving me. I have come to speak of an idea that may change the face of Westeros." Torrhen regarded him, letting the silence stretch. Finally, he gestured for them to take seats at the long table where bread and salt were placed. "Why?" "Oh, you shall have guessed right, though I reserve judgment on your proposals until I've heard them." "Speak, then, of this idea." Aegon accepted bread and salt, acknowledging the safe conduct so essential to northern hospitality. Visenya stood behind him, watchful as ever. Then, in measured words, Aegon laid out the same vision he had shared with the Riverland lords, a continent-wide alliance, forged through trade, mutual defense, and arbitration, with House Targaryen serving as neutral overseer. He spoke of how the north could benefit, regular shipments of grain from the fertile south, easier trade for furs, lumber, and other northern goods, plus the security of not having to worry about a sudden invasion from a southern rival. He spoke of a day when the boundary between the north and the rest of Westeros was not a precarious line, but a mere administrative division in a unified land. Torrhen listened in silence, occasionally flicking his gaze to Visenya. His features revealed little, but Aegon sensed a deep intelligence behind those gray eyes. When Aegon finished, Torrhen let out a slow breath. That is ambitious, he said. You are asking the North to submit to a pact with lords we have never trusted or never even interacted with. Why should I risk tangling the North in southern politics and disputes we have long eschewed? Our winters are harsh, but we weather them alone. We have no want of entangling ourselves with the likes of Harren the Black or Argilac Durrandon. Aegon folded his hands. I understand. The North has stood alone many times. But consider the future. You remain vulnerable to any ambitious king who might decide the North's resources are worth seizing. If the entire continent is united in a pact that abhors conquest, no single lord would dare attempt it. Your people could live in peace and you could export your goods at fair prices. Wouldn't that be worth forging a new bond? Torrhen's brows knitted. Your talk of a Targaryen-led arbitration council that smacks of a southern king with a different name. Why should House Targaryen hold the seat of authority over all others? If that troubles you, I propose we form a council of equals with representatives from each kingdom. House Targaryen would be one of many, though I offer to serve as the initial convening presence. If that too is distasteful, I am open to alternatives. My true goal is unification, not personal power. I offer to swear oaths to that effect. A hush fell. The lords of the North present in the hall shifted uneasily. One, a bearded man wearing the sigil of the Manderleys, spoke. We have heard rumors that Targaryens once possessed dragons, used them to lay waste to enemies. Are we to trust that you will not resurrect that power if it becomes convenient? Visenya answered, her voice quiet but unwavering. We have no dragons. They are lost to our house. We rely on negotiation, not fire and blood. Torrhen gave a measured nod. We do not want to see the North burned. You must understand, Targaryen, that we are a proud people, protective of our independence. Many in the North would sooner freeze in an eternal winter than kneel to a southern overlord. Yet you do not ask us to kneel, but rather to join in a confederation, if I understand correctly. Precisely, Aegon agreed. A confederation, not subjugation. Each kingdom retains its customs, its traditions, its identity. We unify only our resolve to keep peace and foster prosperity. No overlord, no single monarchy overshadowing the rest. But a realm that stands as one when threatened. Torrhen stroked his short beard, eyes narrowed. Very well, I am intrigued. You come offering the North a seat at a table that doesn't yet exist, in an alliance that doesn't yet exist. What do you have in hand from other lords to make me believe this is more than a fevered dream? Aegon hesitated, considering how much he should reveal. Then he produced copies of the letters from the Riverland lords, carefully redacted so as not to reveal names except those who had explicitly given permission. He laid them on the table. Here are the beginnings. Some smaller houses in the Riverlands have already expressed willingness to join. They believe that if enough houses stand together, their local overlord, Harren the Black, can be challenged, not with swords but with the threat of isolation. If Harren tries to crush them, they will appeal to the other signatories who will, in turn, boycott Harren's domain, cut off his trade, deny him any alliance. That would cost him more than a war might earn him. Torrhen's expression shifted from skepticism to genuine curiosity. He read over the letters, his brow creasing. Finally, he placed them down. They're but minor houses, albeit a fair number. I see little sign that the powerful lords of the Vale, the Westerlands, or the Reach have signed on. Aegon met his gaze steadily. I have begun with those who are most desperate, but I plan to approach every major lord in due time. I will journey as far as necessary. I humbly ask that the North consider joining or at least refrain from hindering the process. My request. Send an envoy to an eventual Grand Council, once we have enough interest. Even if you do not commit fully, your presence alone would lend legitimacy. Torrhen considered that. Then he looked to his own council, the men who stood by him. Some frowned, others appeared contemplative. After a lengthy pause, he turned back to Aegon. I will not commit the North to an unknown, untried arrangement without further evidence of its viability. But neither will I dismiss it out of hand. If you can persuade several of the other great powers, say the Vale or the Westerlands, the Reach or the Stormlands, to sign some manner of preliminary charter, I will send my envoys to attend your council. Then, if it appears you have a genuine chance to form a stable union, I will consider placing my own name to it. Relief flickered in Aegon's chest. He inclined his head. That is all I can ask, Your Grace. Thank you. He was invited to remain at Winterfell for a few days, a courtesy. Aegon spent them carefully forging relationships with the northern court, inquiring about the practicalities of trade, the availability of wheat in bad harvests, the threat of the wildlings beyond the wall. He listened more than he spoke, gleaning valuable insights. He even found a certain kinship in Torrhen Stark, a man who desired peace and stability for his people, who was canny enough to see through illusions. In another life, they might have been fast friends. Visenya, meanwhile, observed the northern warriors training in the yard, exchanging a few words with the master-at-arms. She was notably silent on the subject of the alliance, leaving those matters to Aegon. But Aegon knew her well. She was gauging their readiness for conflict, should all diplomacy fail. She was no dreamer. She believed in her brother's vision but also acknowledged that steel might ultimately rule the day. When they departed Winterfell, Torrhen clasped Aegon's arm in farewell. "Return only when you have a real chance to make this alliance more than a pretty notion. The north is large, and we do not stir easily." Aegon nodded, replying in a warm tone, "I thank you for your consideration. I will not waste it." They set off south again, hoping to avoid the pitfalls of the marshes by taking a different route. The journey was wearying, but Aegon's spirit was buoyed by the knowledge that Torrhen Stark had not spurned him outright. A door had opened a crack, and that was all he needed. Word reached him while still traversing the neck. Argilac the Arrogant had not responded favorably to the approaches made by Aegon's envoys. Apparently, Argilac laughed at the idea of a Targaryen alliance with weaklings from the Riverlands. He boasted that the Stormlands needed no southern or foreign contrivances. In short, he dismissed the notion out of hand. But there was a small glimmer of hope. Some of Argilac's bannermen had quietly asked for more information. They did so behind their liege's back, which was risky. The Storm King's pride was fierce, but perhaps some lords saw the value in peace. Or maybe they feared the day Argilac's pride might spark a disastrous war they would be dragged into. Undeterred, Aegon pressed on. He reasoned that if Argilac refused to join, perhaps the Vale or the Westerlands would see the logic of it. But which to approach first? The Vale was ruled by Ronal Arryn, a boy king under the regency of his mother, Shara Arryn. The Westerlands were ruled by Loren Lannister, a man known for both cunning and vanity. The Vale, under a protective mother's regency, might be more open to negotiation if it ensured the boy king's safety. The Westerlands, proud and wealthy, might be more difficult to persuade. In the end, Aegon decided the Vale might be the more promising next step. He sent letters to the Eyrie, proposing a meeting at a neutral location somewhere near the Bloody Gate perhaps, or in Gulltown if traveling to the heights of the Eyrie was deemed too difficult in winter's approach. He couched his words in flattery for Shara Arryn's wisdom and maternal devotion, explaining that his alliance aimed to safeguard the rightful inheritance of all children in the realm. For weeks, no reply came, and Aegon feared the Vale might ignore him. But one chill morning, as he and his entourage rested near the border between the Riverlands and the Crownlands, a falcon-bearing courier found them. He carried Shara Arryn's response. An invitation to come to the Gates of the Moon at the base of the Giant's Lance before ascending to the Eyrie so that they might speak under her protection. Aegon smiled as he read it. Visenya merely arched an eyebrow. They arrived at the Vale's mountain pass in mid-autumn when the leaves had turned copper and gold. The mountains loomed, their summits caught in early snow. The Gates of the Moon was a formidable fortress in its own right, overshadowed by the Eyrie perched high above on a precipice. Banners bearing the Moon and Falcon hung on tall towers. Though the air was cold, the courtyard was alive with bustling servants and knights, and the crispness of the atmosphere lent a certain exhilaration to the scene. Shara Arryn greeted Aegon in the castle's grand hall. She was a regal woman wearing a sky-blue gown trimmed with white fur, her dark hair intricately braided. Beside her stood the young King Ronal, no more than 10 summers old, a solemn child who eyed Aegon with curiosity. The boy's falcon perched on a thick glove, ruffling its feathers with mild interest. "Welcome to the Gates of the Moon, Prince Aegon," Shara said in a measured tone. "Your letters intrigued me, though I confess I harbor doubts as to the feasibility of your grand plan. Still, I am willing to hear more, for the Vale has long endured threats from outside. If your proposition might safeguard my son's realm, I will give it fair consideration." Aegon bowed. "I thank you, your grace. My sister, Visenya Targaryen, also extends her greetings." Visenya inclined her head silently. Shara studied them both, her glance lingering a moment on Visenya's sword hilt. "I see you carry no large retinue. Are you not concerned for your safety, traveling these lands with so few guards?" "There are times when one must show trust to inspire it," Aegon answered gently. I believe your hospitality will keep us safe. Her lips curved in a faint smile. She dismissed the attending lords so she could speak with Aegon and Visenya more privately, though a careful selection of knights and advisors remained nearby. Shara was not naive after all. She guided them into a smaller solar overlooking the vast mountainous panorama. There, in the presence of her son and her most trusted counselor, she invited Aegon to explain his vision once more. He spoke with sincerity, detailing how he hoped to gather signatories from all parts of Westeros. He mentioned the Riverland's interest, Torrhen Stark's promise to send envoys if the alliance gathered momentum. He touched on Argilac's dismissal, though he hinted that some Stormland lords had shown curiosity. Then he posed the question, what if the Vale were among the first great powers to support this confederation? Would it not secure a seat of honor for House Arryn, ensure the safety of Ronald's kingship? Power can be fluid, Aegon said. Today, the Vale stands relatively secure behind its mountains. But if a new threat arose, someone with the resources and determination to starve the Vale of trade or corner it in alliances, could you remain safe forever? If we unify, we can ensure no single tyrant can isolate us. Shara nodded slowly, glancing at her young son. I want him to inherit a kingdom that does not bleed itself dry every generation. But pledging ourselves to this alliance, would it mean the Vale is beholden to the whims of southern lords? No, your grace. The foundation of this union is equality. Each region retains autonomy with disputes settled by a Grand Council. The Targaryens do not claim dominion, we only wish to facilitate. If any region's concerns are dismissed, it would undermine the alliance entirely. Ronald spoke for the first time, his voice timid but earnest. Mother, I think it sounds good. I don't like battles. The stories are exciting, but people die. I wouldn't want to cause that if I were a grown king. His boyish sincerity touched Aegon, and he offered a kind smile. We must never forget that battles are not just glorious stories. They have terrible costs. Shara regarded her son with a mixture of maternal pride and caution. She then fixed her gaze on Aegon. If you can indeed guarantee that the Vale will not be overshadowed, and if enough of the great lords join, I will strongly consider pledging our support. But Prince Aegon, words alone will not suffice. I must see a tangible framework, a charter, laws written down, a system in place that ensures the Vale's voice is heard. Prove that you can forge this structure, and I will sign my name to it. Aegon inclined his head gratefully. That is most reasonable, your grace. In truth, I have begun drafting a preliminary charter. I'd welcome your input and that of your advisors on its terms so that all may feel represented. She gestured for him to present what he had, and he carefully drew forth a scroll from his satchel. Over the following days, they pored over the language, debating everything from voting procedures in the council to the rights and responsibilities of member kingdoms. It was an arduous process, but each clarification and compromise brought the vision closer to reality. Visenya watched from the sidelines, occasionally offering a sharp observation that cut to the heart of a potential pitfall. Shara's counselors showed a mixture of skepticism and grudging respect for Aegon's calm determination. The young King Ronald would occasionally interrupt with a question that cut through the political posturing, disarming the adults with his innocence. Despite the complexities, the seeds of trust began to form. On the final day, Shara Arryn handed Aegon a revised version of the proposed charter, with new clauses that protected the Vale's neutrality if certain conflicts arose. Aegon accepted them without protest, remarking that the same protections would apply to other regions equally. Shara gave him a small but genuine smile. You are unusual among men who style themselves as princes, Aegon Targaryen. You bend so as not to break, forging a compromise rather than demanding subservience. He bowed. My father once told me that inflexibility is the downfall of great dynasties. I intend to learn from that wisdom. She offered him a parting gift, fine Vale steel arrowheads and a small golden brooch shaped like a falcon, a token to remind him of the progress they had made. Then, amid the swirling autumn leaves and the chill mountain air, Aegon departed with a new sense of momentum. The Vale was not yet fully committed, but Shara's willingness to collaborate on the charter was a significant step. Riding south again, Aegon allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He had the beginnings of a written charter, input from the Vale, a likely envoy from the north if more lords joined, and a handful of Riverland families eager to escape Harren's grip. The alliance was still fragile like a newborn foal, but it was growing in clarity. If he could gather the support of the Westerlands or the Reach, two major powers with wealth and influence, then perhaps the rest would follow in a cascade. He might even persuade Argilac to change his tune if he stood alone against a rising tide of unity. But the Westerlands proved elusive. Aegon's letters to Loren Lannister went unanswered at first. Rumor had it the Lannisters were preoccupied with some internal matters of succession or disputes over goldmine rights. Or perhaps King Loren was simply ignoring him. Aegon considered traveling west himself, but Visenya advised caution. She pointed out that showing too much eagerness might weaken his bargaining position. Instead, they turned their eyes to the fertile south, deciding that the Reach might be more receptive. Highgarden was ruled by Mern IX, a man well into his twilight years, with no shortage of heirs and alliances. The Reach was vast, populous, and wealthy, with fields that fed half of Westeros. If Mern joined, he would bring a formidable weight to the alliance. But Mern was known to be proud, though not as overtly arrogant as Argilac. Would he listen to a Targaryen? Or might he dismiss them as a small house from a barren island? Nevertheless, Aegon sent word to Highgarden requesting audience and outlining his vision. To his relief, the old king replied graciously, inviting him to discuss the matter. The tone of the letter suggested curiosity rather than commitment, but it was enough to press forward. They traveled through the Crownlands, skirting the Blackwater, making their way into the lush fields of the Reach. Autumn here was milder, the fields still green, dotted with late-blooming flowers. The road to Highgarden offered a panorama of rolling plains and winding rivers, all under a gentle golden sun. Aegon and Visenya could almost forget the tension that lay across the land. Here, men seemed well-fed, the towns thriving on trade. When they arrived at Highgarden, they found the castle's gates open to them. Mern IX greeted them in the shade of a sprawling apple tree in one of Highgarden's famous courtyards. He was an elderly man, hair white as snow, yet he stood with a straight back and keen eyes. Around him waited a court of lords and ladies, bedecked in the finery of the Reach. A veritable orchard of life and color, so different from the austere northern halls. Mern gestured to a garden bench where they could sit. "Welcome, Prince Aegon. I have heard rumors of your unique ambition from travelers. They say you wish to bind all Westeros together in peace. Such a notion has not been seriously pursued in living memory." Aegon inclined his head, graciously accepting a cup of wine offered by a servant. "I know it may sound fantastical, your grace, but I believe it is possible. Many lesser houses in the Riverlands wish to join, and I have the ear of the Vale and the North if enough great lords pledge support. My intent is not to supplant any king, but to unify them under a single covenant of mutual defense and open trade." Mern sipped his wine thoughtfully. "The fields of the Reach feed many mouths, Prince Aegon. That is our great strength and our great responsibility. In times of war, the small folk suffer. I have seen it firsthand, the devastation of farmland by marauding armies. If your alliance could guarantee the safety of these lands, or at least reduce the likelihood of want and destruction, it would be a boon indeed. But can you truly hold so many proud kings to their word?" Aegon considered his reply carefully. "I cannot single-handedly ensure they keep faith. But the alliance structure, once formalized, would ensure a collective response to any breach. If a lord marches on another, he faces not one foe, but all. If one region is attacked, all others place sanctions, cutting trade, refusing alliance, thus making aggression an unprofitable venture. Over time, the fear of reprisal would encourage peaceful solutions. Much depends on whether men behave rationally," Mern mused, a faint smile playing on his lips. "A tall order, my young friend." "True," Aegon conceded. "Yet it's the best hope we have. I do not claim men's hearts will change overnight. But if the system incentivizes peace, we can curb the worst impulses." Mern studied him, then flicked his gaze to Visenya. "And you, Princess, do you share your brother's optimism that men can be guided away from war by words alone?" Visenya's eyes flicked to Aegon. "I have faith in my brother's purpose. But I also know there are times steel must speak when words fail." Her honesty surprised some of those listening, but Aegon appreciated it. She did not shy from the truth. Mern let out a quiet chuckle. "A balanced perspective, no doubt. Very well, Prince Aegon, my time is short, for I am old. I would see my realm stable before my passing. If you can persuade the Westerlands and the Stormlands, or at least one of them, to sign onto your alliance, then I will commit. With the North, the Vale, and the Reach in accord, the rest might follow or at least respect your design. But if you cannot sway the proud lions of Casterly Rock or humble Argilac's arrogance, it may all be for naught. Aegon bowed his head. I understand, Your Grace. Your support would be invaluable. May I suggest we begin drafting how the Reach's interests would be protected in the Charter? So that if we secure the others, we're ready to sign without delay. Mern smiled, the lines of his face creasing. Indeed. Come, let us walk the gardens and talk. I prefer to do business with the scent of roses in the air. So, over the next few days, Aegon followed the king through the winding paths of Highgarden's famed hedges and orchards, discussing the finer points of the alliance. Mern insisted on certain clauses that guaranteed the safety of trade routes through the Reach, along with reciprocal tariffs beneficial to his region's farmers. Aegon agreed, mindful that each region's specific concerns had to be addressed for the alliance to flourish. He took note of Mern's extensive family, children, grandchildren, each with their own alliances and estates. The old king desired to leave them a lasting legacy of peace, something more monumental than just the sprawl of Highgarden. Aegon capitalized on that sentiment, painting a picture of how a unified Westeros could stand the test of centuries, an enduring testament to Mern's reign. Perhaps that was a gamble, playing to a king's vanity. But Mern seemed genuinely moved by the prospect of doing something unprecedented, forging a new era rather than indulging in petty wars. Ultimately, Mern repeated his condition: he would not sign unless the Stormlands or Westerlands were part of it, ensuring that the alliance would not be overshadowed by one powerful neighbor left outside. Aegon understood the logic. If the Stormlands or Westerlands refused, they might conspire with Harren the Black or some other recalcitrant faction to sabotage the alliance. The Reach did not want to be the only major kingdom putting its neck on the line. With promises and goodwill exchanged, Aegon departed Highgarden under a shower of floral petals, an extravagant farewell gesture Mern arranged. Though it was but a display, it lifted Aegon's spirits to see such a warm send-off. He felt momentum building, as if each step forward made the alliance less a dream and more a tangible reality. On the road, as they passed fields of sun-dappled wheat, Visenya said quietly, so it all comes back to Argilac or Loren. One or the other must be convinced. Or perhaps both. Aegon nodded. Yes. If I can sway either the lion or the stag, the rest might align. Time grows short, though. Harren the Black is bound to notice the stirrings of this alliance, and Argilac might become even more entrenched. I must move swiftly. I worry Argilac's pride is unshakable, Visenya said. He is called arrogant for good reason. Loren Lannister might be more inclined to cunning deals, especially if he sees profit in it. Then Loren is our next target, Aegon decided. We'll head west. Their party embarked on a long trek across the realm, noting how the leaves continued to change. By the time they approached the Westerlands, autumn had deepened. The road was sometimes choked with wagons hauling goods from gold mines, and the chatter of merchants. Aegon sent another letter ahead to King Loren Lannister, requesting an audience. This time, a response came quickly, an invitation to Casterly Rock. It was not overly warm in tone, but it was not a rejection either. And so they found themselves before the colossal stone edifice of Casterly Rock, carved out of a great promontory over the sea. It looked impregnable, a testament to wealth and power. The gold lion banners snapped in the wind. Aegon could almost feel the weight of centuries of Lannister pride bearing down on him. King Loren received them in a cavernous hall. He was a man in his prime, with a mane of golden hair and sharp, calculating eyes. Rich crimson and gold attire adorned his imposing figure. Behind him, courtiers and knights observed with the same steely poise, as if always prepared for a show of power. Prince Aegon Targaryen, Loren greeted, his tone measured. I have heard many tales of your attempt to knit Westeros together through words rather than swords. A bold gamble. Please enlighten me as to why I should take part. Aegon offered a respectful bow. Your Grace, I come to you with a proposal that may reshape history. You rule over a land of abundant wealth, from gold mines to skilled traders. Imagine if that wealth were multiplied by stable, continent-wide commerce. A realm where all roads remain open, where your exports find easy markets in the Reach, the Vale, the North, and beyond. Picture a Westeros that does not devour itself in wars, where you can continue to grow your influence through prosperity rather than conquest. Is that not a future worth considering? Loren smiled, his eyes narrowing slightly. We Lannisters know how to turn a profit, Prince Aegon. The question is, what profit is there in tying ourselves to a fragile arrangement that might collapse the moment two lords spat at each other? Aegon nodded, expecting such skepticism. Your Grace, I have in my satchel a draft charter that already includes input from the Vale and the Reach. The North has also signaled interest. If you join and we form a critical mass, who would dare stand against such an alliance? It would have the wealth of the Westerlands, the breadbaskets of the Reach, the strategic fortresses of the Vale, and the vast expanse of the North combined. Even Argilac or Harren the Black would think twice. The arrangement's stability derives from its comprehensiveness. Alone, any of us can be picked off or isolated. Together, we become an unassailable coalition. Loren's gaze flickered. He reclined in his seat, stroking the pommel of the sword at his side, more a gesture of habit than threat. An unassailable coalition led by House Targaryen? Or do you propose we all hold hands in a circle? Aegon kept his tone courteous. A circle would be the appropriate metaphor, for each realm holds a place in it. House Targaryen will serve as the initiator, but not the absolute leader. If your Grace is concerned about hierarchy, I assure you we have designed the council to give equal voice to each region's delegates. Should you choose to support this vision, you would be one of its principal architects. You would shape its future. Loren's lips curled in a half-smile. You make a compelling argument, but I must weigh this carefully. The Westerlands does not suffer from a lack of trade. Our gold is welcomed in all corners of Westeros. Why bind ourselves to commitments that might draw us into the troubles of lesser realms? Consider Harren the Black. If he chooses war, do I want Lannister knights spilled to defend the Riverlands? Aegon answered steadily. If Harren the Black succeeds in crushing the Riverlands, do you imagine he will stop there? Tyrants do not moderate themselves once they taste victory. Without the alliance, you might eventually face Harren's armies alone, should he covet the gold of the Rock. With the alliance, you ensure he cannot make a move without facing the combined might of multiple kingdoms. In that sense, it is far cheaper to stand together from the start. Loren was silent for a time, considering. Then he waved for a servant to bring refreshments. Wine was poured, spiced and aromatic. He raised his cup and took a measured sip. Finally, he said, let me see this charter of yours. I'll have my advisors review it and we'll debate the merits. If it seems sound, I will consider adding my signature, provided I see clear benefits and adequate safeguards for the Westerlands' interests. Aegon handed over the scroll, neatly penned with various emendations from the Vale and the Reach. Loren scanned it, occasionally murmuring to himself. He set it aside, then beckoned for a council of lords to gather. Visenya gave Aegon a slight nod, as if to say this was progress. Indeed, Loren had not dismissed them outright, which was more than could be said of Argilac so far. The days that followed involved endless discussions in Casterly Rock's opulent meeting chambers. Aegon found himself staring at gilded ceilings and tapestries depicting Lannister triumphs of old, an ever-present reminder that House Lannister prided itself on dominance. He negotiated with Loren's advisors, clarifying that the alliance wouldn't hamper the Westerlands' gold trade, that it would, in fact, expand it through guaranteed open markets. They hammered out fine points of taxation agreements, the settlement of disputes, and the timing of annual councils. Visenya, for her part, spoke occasionally but mostly observed the undercurrents. She detected which lords were open to the alliance and which felt threatened. Aegon confided in her each night, weaving her observations into his approach. Step by step, they coaxed the Lannister court into seeing the alliance not as a chain around their necks but as a gate to new riches and security. Toward the end of their stay, Loren summoned Aegon to a private audience. He was seated in a smaller solar, the windows overlooking the sunlit sea. He gestured for Aegon to take a seat across from him. I have read your charter thoroughly, Loren said, setting it on the table between them. I find it promising, ambitious, yes, but not impossible. If the Reach is truly on board and the Vale is receptive, that is a formidable foundation. As for the North, they may be distant, but their eventual participation lends a certain gravitas. I am nearly convinced, Prince Aegon, that I should sign this charter. Only one matter gnaws at me. Aegon kept his expression attentive. What matter is that, your Grace? Loren's gaze turned penetrating. Trust. If I commit the Westerlands, I do so expecting the full weight of this alliance behind me if some threat arises. But you are, by your own admission, no more than a mediator. What ensures you remain neutral and fair, that you do not grow partial to, say, the Vale or the Reach, or that your house does not decide to set aside words and muster an army for your own advantage? Aegon had expected this question sooner or later. He placed his hands lightly on the table. The very structure of the alliance ensures accountability. If House Targaryen, or any house for that matter, violates the covenant, the rest can collectively respond. Moreover, we Targaryens have no vast domain or resources of our own beyond Dragonstone. We lack the capacity to dominate others through force. Our influence comes solely from our role as the initiators of this alliance. If we betray it, we lose everything. Loren assessed him, perhaps probing for any sign of falsehood. At length, he inclined his head. Very well. I am inclined to take this risk if only because the potential gains are considerable. I will sign on one condition. The charter must explicitly state that any breach by the mediator by House Targaryen, that is, immediately voids the alliance's obligation to that mediator, and the offending party is to be cast out. In short, if you break faith, we owe you nothing and may act as we see fit. Can you accept that? Aegon did not hesitate. Yes, I can. He understood the symbolism of that clause. By adding it, Loren was ensuring that Aegon's leadership role was contingent upon unwavering neutrality. It was a fair precaution. Aegon took it as a sign that Loren was, in truth, eager to join but needed the security of a written safeguard. They shook hands over the table, sealing the agreement in principle. Loren's advisors would add the clause, and a formal signing would follow once the Stormlands position was clarified. Though the Westerlands agreed in principle, Loren wisely wanted to ensure Argilac's reaction wouldn't lead to a potential conflict that no one else would support. Aegon could not fault him for that. Thus, in a momentous shift, House Lannister effectively became part of Aegon's growing confederation. The door had opened wider. Aegon left Casterly Rock with a mixture of relief and urgency. There was one major holdout among the southern kings, Argilac the Arrogant. And then there was Harren the Black, looming over the Riverlands like a storm cloud. But with the Westerlands, the Reach, the Vale, and the North all either on board or close to it, perhaps Argilac could be pressured into compliance. He traveled to a small castle near the Blackwater Bay, a place he had designated for a grand meeting of sorts, a neutral ground. There, the newly signed or nearly signed lords could gather and finalize the alliance. A flurry of ravens departed, each bearing invitations to the great houses, requesting their presence or that of their envoys. The castle was modest in size but well maintained by a lesser lord loyal to no major faction. Its halls would serve as the cradle of a new Westeros, if all went as planned. The next weeks were a blur of arrivals. Lords from the Riverlands came, excited and fearful. The North sent representatives. Torrhen Stark himself could not come, but he dispatched his brother, Brandon, with full authority to assess the alliance. The Vale's party arrived, led by a lord close to Shara Arryn, carrying the Boy King's endorsement. The Reach's envoys came with Mern Iex's blessings, though the old king himself did not make the journey, citing his age. Most importantly, Loren Lannister attended in person, accompanied by a retinue of regal splendor. They gathered in the castle's main hall, a space hastily adorned with the banners of various houses. Aegon stood at the head of a broad table, flanked by Visenya, the Targaryen banner discreetly hung behind them. The tension in the air was palpable. Here was a congregation of powers that seldom met outside the battlefield. Yet they had come, each drawn by the possibility of a realm united without bloodshed. Aegon called the meeting to order with measured solemnity. He presented the near-complete charter, refined by feedback from the Vale, the Reach, and the Westerlands, and shaped in part by the demands of the Riverlands lords. He read aloud its core principles: mutual defense, open trade, neutrality in internal disputes unless they threatened the stability of the realm, a grand council to mediate conflicts, and the clause that any breach by the Targaryen mediators, or indeed any signatory, would trigger collective response. One by one, the representatives raised concerns, hammered out details, and suggested amendments. Brandon Stark argued for clearer definitions of the realm's responsibilities in times of famine. Loren Lannister pressed for a robust system of commercial courts. The Vale's envoy championed strong protections for children's inheritances. The Riverland lords sought explicit mention of relief from onerous taxes inflicted by Harren the Black. On and on it went, each interest laid bare in a swirl of parchment and debate. Aegon mediated patiently, forging compromises that left no side fully satisfied but each side content enough to proceed. At last, in a historic moment, Loren Lannister lifted the quill and signed. The Vale's envoy signed on behalf of King Ronald. The Reach's delegation signed on Mern's behalf with flourishes of their house seals. Brandon Stark signed with a bold stroke committing the North. Then the Riverland lords who had braved Harren's wrath put their names down. The charter, still lacking the Stormlands, nonetheless represented an unprecedented coalition of 5 major powers, plus a swath of lesser houses. A hush fell as they regarded the parchment laden with seals. Aegon stepped forward, heart pounding. This is the beginning of a new age. We stand not as rivals, but as co-authors of peace. Let it be said that on this day, houses ancient and proud set aside suspicion to forge a realm governed by reason and unity. May the seven, if you follow them or the old gods or any deity you keep, bless our enterprise and keep us steadfast. The lords murmured assent, relief, or cautious optimism. But one glaring absence loomed. Argilac the Arrogant had neither attended nor sent envoys. Nor had Harren the Black done so, which was unsurprising. He would almost certainly refuse any alliance that diminished his despotic authority. Yet if both men remained outside, the Confederation might face immediate challenges. They decided upon a course of action. The new Confederation would officially extend an invitation to Argilac and Harren, demanding they cease hostile acts and adhere to the Covenant's terms if they wished to enjoy its benefits. If they refused, the Confederation members would enact collective measures, sanctions, trade embargoes, and, as a final resort, combined military pressure if absolutely necessary. Aegon prayed it would not come to open conflict. Yet they could not allow these two outliers to undermine everything they had built. Letters were dispatched at once. The gathered lords returned to their lands, prepared to honor the trade terms and the mutual defense pact. Aegon lingered in the castle, awaiting replies, spending sleepless nights wondering if the realm's first test would come sooner than expected. Argilac's answer arrived swiftly, penned in brusque, dismissive language. He refused to sign, mocking the paper shield of the Confederation. He insisted he had no intention of kneeling to a weak Targaryen whelp. As for Harren, no letter came at all. Instead, rumor spread that Harren was mustering men at Harrenhal, furious at the Riverland lords who had dared join Aegon's alliance. Faced with this reality, the Confederation convened an urgent session, this time via raven messages rather than a physical gathering. Aegon proposed they enact the first step, a complete trade embargo against the Stormlands and Harrenhal. No Confederation merchant would travel there. No goods would be sold to or purchased from them. The plan was to strangle them economically and diplomatically. If Argilac and Harren found themselves cut off from vital resources, especially on sea winter crept in, they might yield. For months, the Confederation held firm to this embargo, checking roads, halting caravans attempting to bring supplies to the Stormlands or Harren's domain. The tension was palpable. Farmers in Argilac's land began feeling the pinch as prices soared. Merchants complained bitterly to Argilac, who refused to relent. Meanwhile, the smaller lords under Harren's yoke smuggled what they could, but their success was limited. Harren howled with fury, threatening to break the alliance by force. But to wage a war without supplies or allies was no simple task, even for him. The Confederation's threat was not empty. The combined might of the Westerlands, the Reach, the Vale, the North, and the Riverlands dwarfed his capabilities. Even Argilac's famed storm-lashed fortress would struggle to withstand a united front. Caught between pride and practicality, Argilac blustered for a while longer. But as the year waned and winter approached, provisions ran short in certain corners of the Stormlands. The lords under him began pressuring him to negotiate. Argilac hated the idea, but a rebellion from within might loom if he failed to feed his people. A cold, bitter letter finally arrived at Aegon's designated seat. Argilac demanded an audience to discuss terms. As for Harren, he tried to terrorize the region near Harrenhal, burning local villages to punish the lords who signed the alliance. But with the embargo strangling his domain's trade, his men soon faced shortages of grain and other essentials. In desperation, he seized shipments traveling to the north only to discover that the alliance had begun protecting caravans with armed escorts. A swift skirmish ended in a humiliating standstill for Harren's forces, outnumbered and outclassed. Word spread that even Harren's supposed invincibility was being tested by an enemy that fought with strategy rather than large-scale battles. Finally, Harren sent a single envoy to Aegon with an ultimatum: lift the embargo or face war. Aegon's reply was simple: sign the charter and cease hostilities, or remain isolated. The envoy returned to Harrenhal, and for weeks, no word came. Then, as the first snows sprinkled the Riverlands, Harren himself arrived, traveling with a substantial guard. He demanded to see the Targaryen fool, Who dared orchestrate such a siege without swords? They met in the courtyard of the same neutral castle, on a gray day when a biting wind howled. Harren was a towering figure with a face hardened by cruelty, his hair graying at the temples. He sneered when Aegon, dressed in a plain black cloak, approached with Visenya at his side. "You fancy yourself a conqueror?" Harren spat. "You dare starve me out rather than face me in honest battle?" Aegon kept his composure. "I fancy myself a mediator of an alliance that seeks peace. You have chosen to isolate yourself. No one starved you. You starved yourself by refusing to join." Harren's eyes blazed with anger. His men loomed behind him, hands on their swords, but so did a host of allied guards wearing the sigils of various Confederation houses. Visenya's hand hovered near Dark Sister's hilt, ready in case of violence. "You are a coward," Harren said, his voice low. "A real man would meet me in battle." Aegon shook his head. "I have no interest in war. That is the entire point of this alliance. You have a choice. Sign the charter, receive the benefits, and remain lord of your lands, or continue this fruitless defiance and see your domain collapse under embargo. The other lords of the Riverlands have deserted you. Why cling to an empty throne?" Harren growled, his fists clenched. For a moment it seemed he might strike Aegon. But something in the environment, the presence of so many allied knights, or the knowledge that no matter how strong he was, he could not defeat half of Westeros, stayed his hand. "Fine," he snarled. "I will sign your damn charter. But hear me, I recognize no Targaryen sovereignty. I submit to no man's laws but my own." Aegon nodded calmly. "You submit to the charter's laws or you do not receive its benefits. The alliance is built on mutual agreement. Nothing more, nothing less." Harren's face remained a thundercloud, but he took the quill and scrawled his name. The strokes were so forceful they nearly tore the parchment. Then he threw the quill aside. "You have your signature. May the Seven curse you for forcing my hand." A tense hush followed, but no swords were drawn. Harren pivoted on his heel and strode away, his guards in tow. As he departed, one could almost hear the collective exhalation of relief. Harren the Black had been brought to heel not by flames or dragons or pitched battles, but by the steady squeeze of an embargo that left him no other choice. Shortly after, Argilac arrived with a more dignified, if still grudging, demeanor. He too signed after a curt exchange, though he refused to make eye contact with Aegon. "You have robbed me of honorable war," he muttered, as if war were some prized tradition. And with that final flourish of quills, all the kingdoms of Westeros were bound, some more enthusiastically than others, by a single confederation charter. Aegon stood before the assembled lords and envoys, the signed document in hand, and let himself feel the weight of history. He saw Harren slumped to one side, sullen, Argilac stiff as a statue, Loren wearing a faintly triumphant smile, the Vale's men exuding relief, the Reach's envoys brimming with pride, the Riverland lords nearly in tears at their liberation from tyranny, and the North's representative watching with quiet satisfaction. He cleared his throat, his voice echoing against the stone walls. "Let all present bear witness. On this day, the Seven Kingdoms, once divided, have agreed to stand as one confederation. Let this be the first step toward a new dawn, free of endless bloodshed, where reason guides us, and we thrive together rather than tear each other down. As mediator, I pledge House Targaryen's eternal devotion to fairness and unity. May we keep this vow now and forever." A resounding chorus of assent, some reluctant, some earnest, swept through the hall. Cups of wine were raised, toasts offered. Even Argilac was forced to tip his goblet, though he spilled more than he drank. Aegon felt dizzy with the significance of it all. No swords clashed. No dragons burned keeps. Words had done the work of war, forging a realm unimaginable a year ago. The Confederation was not perfect. Myriad challenges lay ahead. Old grudges would not vanish overnight. The intricacies of governing such a broad alliance would test the wits and patience of all involved. But it was a beginning, a glimmer of hope that Westeros might find a different path. Aegon walked among the lords, accepting their congratulations or, in some cases, their grudging acknowledgments. Visenya kept a watchful presence at his side, her expression a subtle mix of pride and vigilance. In the days following, a great feast was held. People who had once eyed each other with suspicion now found themselves seated at the same table, exchanging uncomfortable small talk. The wine flowed, the music played. For perhaps the first time in living memory, lords from Dorne to the north for a small Dornish retinue had arrived as well, albeit as observers mingled in one hall without brandishing steel. Aegon circulated, ensuring no tensions boiled over. He found Torrhen Stark's brother in conversation with a Reach lord about shared trade prospects. He overheard a Lannister advisor haggling with a Stormland knight about the price of oranges. Tiny steps, but steps nonetheless. Later, he slipped away onto a quiet balcony overlooking the castle courtyard where Visenya stood, gazing at the sky. The night was crisp and clear, stars glimmering overhead. "You did it," Visenya said, turning to him. Her tone was subdued as though she could hardly believe it. "Westeros is united, at least on parchment." Aegon exhaled, leaning on the balcony's stone rail. "On parchment, yes. Enforcing it will be another matter. But the momentum is with us now. With so many houses standing together, no one will risk open war lightly." She studied him for a moment. "I recall how you once said that dragons were not the heart of our house, our words were. You have proved it tonight. I only hope men do not forget this lesson." He nodded, a faint smile touching his lips. "So do I." They stood there in comfortable silence, letting the realization settle. The courtyard below bustled with servants cleaning up after the feast, extinguishing torches. But the hush of the night enveloped them as if granting a moment's peace after the long struggle. Aegon remembered standing on that lonely shore months ago, resolved to attempt the impossible. And now, improbably, here he was, with the Seven Kingdoms joined in a confederation that might reshape history. Without war, without dragons, just alliances and the hard work of negotiation. Over the following weeks, as lords departed to return to their domains, the confederation's administrative structure began to take shape. Aegon oversaw the formation of a small secretariat on Dragonstone, staffed by scribes and envoys from each major region. Their task was to coordinate the new realm-wide policies, track trade agreements, and ensure lines of communication remained open. A rotating council was established, with sessions planned thrice yearly in different locations so that no single region claimed the right to host all meetings. News spread among the small folk, some greeted it with hope, others with indifference, for life on the land went on much as before. But as the roads became safer and tolls standardized, merchants traveled more freely and a slow prosperity began to trickle through. Perhaps that was the real miracle. The notion that a farmer could till his field without fear of raiders from the next kingdom. That a merchant could sell wares in Lannisport without dread of being turned away at the gate. It was not immediate paradise. Disputes continued. Feuds simmered. Some men balked at the new rules. But the overarching framework held, because no one great lord dared break it outright and face the wrath of a united Westeros. Aegon traveled incessantly, settling quarrels, encouraging trade, listening to the troubles of lords and small folk alike. Visenya handled security matters, quietly ensuring that any rumor of rebellion was addressed with swift, firm diplomacy, or, on rare occasions, the threat of unified force. In time, even Argilac grudgingly admitted that the Confederation was not as bad as he had feared. Harren retreated to his monstrous castle, complaining that Aegon's alliance had stolen his chance at conquest, but grudgingly collecting the taxes mandated by the new realm-wide system instead of launching raids. The North found new markets for its furs. The Vale discovered a steady buyer for its mountain stone. The Reach's farmers grew wealthier. The Westerlands saw their gold circulate more freely than ever. On Dragonstone, Aegon finally established a modest palace of administration, a place where envoys from all corners came to consult, to coordinate the next steps of integration. Some whispered that Aegon should name himself High King of Westeros, but he refused. That was not his purpose. He styled himself simply as Lord Aegon of House Targaryen, mediator of the Confederation, a role that relied on moral authority rather than absolute power. And so it was that Westeros entered an era of relative peace, not forged by dragonfire, but by the determined vision of a man who believed that words could be mightier than swords. Swords still existed, of course, and the tension of old rivalries could not vanish overnight. But for the first time in centuries, men like Harren the Black and Argilac the Arrogant found themselves shackled not by chains, but by agreements they had no choice but to honor, for fear of losing everything. The alliances woven in the year became a tapestry strong enough to guard against the unraveling by any single thread. When Aegon reflected on it all, often standing on Dragonstone's sea-battered ramparts, he felt an odd mixture of wonder and humility. The realm was vast, its people diverse, its history steeped in bloodshed. Yet he had seen the flicker of unity in the eyes of lords who once prepared armies against each other. That flicker, carefully kindled, could burn brighter than any dragon's flames. And though his house no longer commanded dragons, though the proud beasts were lost to time, he realized they were never the true heart of House Targaryen. The heart was the willingness to dream of something better than conquest, to shape the world not by fear but by the promise of shared destiny. In the annals of history, men would call him Aegon the Unifier or Aegon the Peacebringer, marveling at how he achieved what no warlord or dragon lord had before him. Scholars would debate whether it was cunning or luck that led so many proud kings to sign a single charter. Balladeers would sing that he wrestled Westeros from its fractious nature with naught but parchment and quill. In taverns, the small folk might lift their mugs and say, Aegon Targaryen changed the world without spilling a drop of blood. But Aegon himself knew it had not been so simple. He recalled every long night of negotiation, every sharp word exchanged, the threat of swords always lurking just out of sight. He remembered Visenya's watchful hand on her sword, the scowls of Argilac and Harren, the carefully baited flattery for Loren, the paternal pride of Mern, the maternal caution of Shara, the stoic wariness of Torren. He remembered the small folk who labored in the fields, the artisans who plied their craft, the children who deserved a future free of the horrors of war. It was for them that he had done this. In the end, perhaps the miracle was that enough men, weary of the old ways, had chosen to try something new. Perhaps all it took was one voice strong enough to unify their hopes and a will unwavering enough to see it through. That was Aegon's gift to Westeros, not the roar of dragons, but a single resonant call to stand together as one. And for now at least, that call was answered. Aegon often reflected that the new dawn of Westeros seemed both luminous and fragile, like the early light of morning that can be consumed by the first storm. The Confederation's freshly inked charter bound all the great kings and lords of the land to a single cause: peace. Yet the ink had scarcely dried before the challenges of upholding that peace emerged in subtle forms, revealing just how delicate the realm's newfound unity could be. It required constant labor and watchful eyes to ensure that no frayed thread would unravel the entire tapestry. When the snows finally melted in the riverlands, and the spring rains came washing the roads clean, Aegon traveled from Dragonstone to the central regions to inspect how the embargoes had lifted and how trade was resuming. Reports indicated that the people in Harren's domain were relieved to see shipments of grain and textiles flowing again. The petty lords under Harren had replaced their sullen terror with cautious hope, as the new confederation promised that Harren could not arbitrarily raise their taxes for some new vanity project. Argilac, too, had been forced to adjust to the idea that caravans from the Reach and the Westerlands would not be threatened on Stormland roads. Though the old Storm King remained as proud as ever, he could not deny that his own bannermen felt a measure of relief, for an open flow of trade improved their livelihood. Wars cost coin, while peace had suddenly begun filling pockets. Aegon and Visenya ventured through quiet hamlets that had once braced for the passage of armies, where peasants now paused in their labors to watch the Targaryen procession. A small banner flew on the lead horse, displaying a hastily made emblem for the Confederation, 7 interlocking rings in a circular design, each ring representing one of the constituent kingdoms. There was no official sigil beyond that, but it served as a unifying symbol that merchants recognized. Most ordinary folk had never before seen a unified banner meant to represent an entire continent. They gawked at it in wonderment, uncertain if it foretold a permanent change or just a passing novelty. Some new contrivance of lords that might be dissolved the next time swords were drawn. During this journey, Aegon convened a small council in an unremarkable keep near the Crossroads Inn. Various local Riverland lords arrived in better spirits than at any time he could recall. The fear of Harren had not vanished, but it had lessened. Aegon presided over these meetings with a quiet confidence, inviting comment from the lesser lords who, in generations past, might never have been given a voice. They spoke of taxes, irrigation ditches, new roads in disrepair. Aegon listened more than he spoke, taking note of each request. Visenya, standing behind him with arms folded, appeared aloof but missed nothing. In particular, she noticed a lord from House Vance who seemed uneasy whenever Harren's name was mentioned. She drew him aside discreetly after one council session, inquiring if trouble still brewed. He confessed that Harren's men had conducted nighttime raids on suspected smugglers to punish those whom he believed were slow to pay him homage. That in turn fueled new resentments in pockets of the Riverlands. Visenya thanked him for his honesty, then relayed the news to Aegon. It was a sign that not all wounds would vanish at the stroke of a quill. Certain lords, especially Harren, still tested boundaries. Aegon composed a carefully worded letter to Harren, reminding him that the terms of the Confederation forbade any localized terror that went beyond the right of a liege to enforce reasonable taxes. While Harren doubtless bristled, there was little he could do but reply in icy formality, claiming that he merely rooted out traitors who withheld coin. Aegon made it known that if Harren continued such heavy-handed raids, the Confederation would investigate. It was a small but critical demonstration of the new order's watchfulness. For now, Harren grudgingly moderated his approach, though his anger simmered like a pot on the brink of boiling. Meanwhile, Argilac found his own ways to test the alliance. He refused to let certain trade caravans pass without paying extra tolls, insisting that the Stormlands had unique needs and that fees must be collected for road maintenance. Stormland knights stationed at key routes demanded coins from merchants, and though this did not outright violate the charter, it skirted the agreed-upon limits for tolls. Loren Lannister complained fiercely, arguing that the Stormlands were exploiting a loophole. The Vale's envoys took note, as did the Reaches. Indignation rose in multiple quarters, threatening to sour Argilac's new compliance. Aegon summoned Argilac to a hearing at Summerhall, a newly built castle in the Dornish Marches meant to be a symbolic place of unity between the Reach and the Stormlands. The building was still under partial construction, but enough rooms were complete to host a formal meeting. The roads leading there were muddy from spring rains, and the sky overhead was draped in low clouds, as if the weather itself tried to deter Argilac from complying. Yet eventually the Storm King arrived with a small retinue, caked in mud and in a predictably foul mood. A handful of Targaryen delegates, plus envoys from the Westerlands and the Reach, received him in a barely furnished audience chamber. A few scattered torches lent a meager warmth to the damp air. Aegon rose from a simple wooden chair. "Your Grace, thank you for coming. I trust your journey was safe." Argilac scowled as though the question were an insult. "Safe, yes. Long and unpleasant. Why summon me to an unfinished fortress at the edge of my realm?" "Because it lies between your domain and that of the Reach," Aegon replied, keeping his tone calm. "And because it represents new beginnings. We have matters to discuss regarding the tolls you've imposed." "I impose no tolls beyond what is fair," Argilac insisted, though his words contained a flicker of defensiveness. "It costs coin to maintain roads and ensure travelers' safety. Or would you prefer bandits roam freely?" Lord Meadows, representing the Reach, spoke up. "These tolls are thrice what the Confederation's guidelines recommend. They strangle trade into the Stormlands rather than encourage it." Argilac's fists clenched on the table's edge. "We have unique circumstances. The storms, the rough terrain, the fortifications. Why should the Stormlands abide the same rates as those who dwell in gentler climates?" Aegon tilted his head. "Because the Confederation's charter established uniform guidelines for tolls, ensuring no region exploits or burdens commerce unfairly. If you require a slight adjustment for your roads, that can be discussed, but tripling the toll cannot stand." Argilac let out a long breath, his eyes flicking to the watchers from the Westerlands, whose expressions were studiously neutral. He knew that if he refused, he risked sparking a new embargo or at least renewed tensions. For a moment, it looked as if he might slam his hand on the table or utter a volley of insults. Instead, he said, "Fine. Let the toll be renegotiated at half its present rate. That still exceeds your guideline, but it allows me to protect travelers effectively." The delegates exchanged glances. Aegon saw that Lord Meadows seemed prepared to protest, but he caught the man's eye and gave a slight nod, a sign that compromise was necessary. Argilac's face had turned a dusky red already, and pressing for a complete rollback might drive him to open defiance. Aegon spoke softly, "Half is progress. Let us then fix that rate as the maximum. If your roads remain unsafe, the Confederation can discuss additional support, perhaps dispatching joint patrols. There's no need to bear the costs alone." Argilac's scowl relaxed fractionally, as though he grudgingly recognized that Aegon was offering an olive branch. "Joint patrols? Humph. The Stormlands can guard its own roads, but fine. If that's what the Confederation requires, so be it. It was an uneasy compromise, yet it allowed everyone to part ways without further rancor. This small victory reaffirmed Aegon's belief that the Confederation would survive only if each grievance was addressed through negotiation rather than letting resentments fester. Still, the day had been exhausting. After Argilac stomped out with his retinue, Aegon slumped into a chair by the hearth. Visenya approached, resting a hand on his shoulder. He chafes at any constraint. Expect more of this. Aegon nodded, feeling the weight of what he had undertaken. Yes. But if we handle each incident swiftly, men will learn that the Confederation is not hollow. Even Argilac must see that we won't let him undo the unity so many have embraced. Together, brother and sister spent the night in Summerhall, hearing the wind whistle around half-finished towers and scaffolding that creaked in the gusts. It was a lonely, haunting sound, but it reminded Aegon that building anything lasting, whether a fortress or a realm, took time, patience, and an acceptance of certain dangers. Nothing was guaranteed, yet he found a quiet sense of resolve as though the stones rising around him echoed his own aspiration. Over the following months, a system of smaller councils emerged within each region to handle local disputes under the aegis of Confederation law. Northern lords gathered at Moat Cailin to discuss border raids by wildlings. The Vale's knights convened at the Gates of the Moon to refine commercial regulations for trade across the Narrow Sea, and in the Westerlands, Loren Lannister hosted monthly sessions to address goldmine rights. Aegon watched it all from Dragonstone, receiving written reports from envoys who traveled across the land. He occasionally set out himself to mediate trickier feuds. Harren remained the most intractable. The sheer size and menacing aura of Harrenhal loomed over every attempt at Riverland reform. Word spread that Harren still commanded a large retinue of hardened knights and soldiers, a personal guard big enough to intimidate smaller lords. He complied with the charter in the most grudging fashion. Taxes were lower than before, but not by much, and any perceived sign of disloyalty from a vassal was met with harassment. While the Confederation had effectively ended Harren's chance at open conquest, it had not ended his tyranny behind closed gates. Most Riverland lords tried to endure by strictly following the letter of the law, so Harren could not accuse them of defiance. Even so, rumors of his brutality lingered. When these rumors grew too loud to ignore, Aegon decided to gather a special investigative party, composed of neutral Confederation representatives. A knight from the Vale, a maester from Old Town, and a retired northern steward with a reputation for integrity. They were tasked with journeying to Harrenhal, reviewing the realm's adherence to Confederation law, and reporting their findings. In the Confederation, every king or lord paramount had pledged to permit inspectors if serious allegations arose, though no one had expected that pledge to be tested so soon. Harren might refuse them entry or harass them until they fled. But Aegon insisted that the mission go forward, for turning a blind eye now would set a ruinous precedent. As the three delegates crossed the drawbridge of Harrenhal, they marveled at its colossal walls and the black towers that seemed to scrape the sky. The place emanated a menacing gloom, as though the souls of workers who died building it still haunted the battlements. Harren greeted them with a sneer in the vaulted entrance hall. He stood upon a dais, clad in dark leathers, his imposing frame backlit by torchlight. "Come to sniff around my halls, have you?" he demanded. "Very well, see what you must. But do not expect me to coddle you." The delegates bowed stiffly, stepping forward to explain they were there to see if Harren was respecting the Confederation's demands against violent retribution and extortionate taxes. Harren's expression soured, but he pointed them down a corridor. "You'll find my reeve in that wing. He keeps records of all taxes paid. Interview whomever you wish. Just do not interfere in my internal affairs, or I'll have you thrown off my walls." Their inspection lasted 3 tense days. They spoke quietly with some of the small folk in Harrenhal's kitchens and courtyards, gleaning that Harren had largely ceased large-scale terror, but still exacted harsh punishments on any who failed to pay him promptly. Tax records were murky, with many suspicious penalty fees that soared beyond normal rates. Yet it was unclear if these fees violated the Charter's guidelines or merely skirted them. At nights, the three delegates returned to their shared chambers, comparing notes in low whispers, aware that guards might be listening through the thick wooden doors. On the final day, Harren summoned them to an upper tower chamber with narrow windows that let in slivers of gray light. "Well," he growled, "have you found some heinous crime to brand me with? Or will you leave with your tails between your legs?" His black eyes seemed to challenge them to speak the word treason. The maester, a middle-aged man wearing the neutral gray robes of his order, stepped forward. We have found that while you do not openly breach the terms of the Confederation, you exploit ambiguities to maintain high taxes and a climate of fear. We must recommend to Mediator Aegon that these ambiguities be clarified in additional bylaws. Further, we suggest that a small Confederation office be established in the Riverlands to ensure clarity of taxation. Harren's lip curled. Ah, so you do not accuse me of breaking the law. You merely recommend that the laws be changed to further shackle me. One of the other delegates, the knight from the Vale, said carefully, "We do not seek to shackle you, my lord. We seek to protect your small folk from extortion. The charter promises them reasonable governance." Harren glared at him. "The small folk are mine to command. If they do not pay, they do not eat. That is the way of things. But if you wish to waste time drafting more rules, be my guest." A mocking smirk twisted his mouth. "Rules will not change the nature of men." The trio departed, relieved to leave Harrenhal's menacing corridors behind. When their report reached Aegon, he held a special session with envoys from each kingdom presenting the findings. The lords of the Riverlands demanded sharper action. The Vale and the North, ever cautious, concurred that new bylaws might remedy the loopholes Harren exploited. The Reach lords muttered that if Harren continued to oppress the Riverlands, it would ultimately disrupt trade. Even Loren Lannister, typically more concerned with profit than principle, recognized the danger of letting Harren run amok. Argilac, ironically, displayed a flicker of amusement at Harren's defiance, perhaps seeing in Harren a fellow man who hated being policed. But Argilac was constrained by the Confederation and said little. Aegon took a measured approach, drafting amendments that set strict limits on penalty fees and gave Confederation agents the right to investigate any large-scale imprisonment or rumored mass punishment of vassals. Harren objected strenuously, penning a vitriolic letter in which he called the Confederation a noose tightened by scribes and meddlers. But in the end, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, he grudgingly accepted the amendments. Thus, step by step, the realm's new laws took shape, hammered out by countless small conflicts, each resolved through negotiation rather than war. Even so, it was not all grim contention. Alongside these bureaucratic struggles, new bonds formed between houses that had once eyed each other across battle lines. The Mallisters of Seaguard began exchanging more regular shipments of fish and grain with Lannisport. The Vale's merchants found markets in the north for iron and timber shipped by boat around the fingers. The Stormlands saw artisans from the Reach traveling to build better roads in the storm-lashed territory, forging personal friendships. At fairs and tournaments, for tournaments were still held, though less frequently, knights from formerly hostile lands now tilted against each other in justs that ended with handshakes rather than grudges. It was an unfamiliar but quietly hopeful atmosphere, especially for the younger generation who had never known a time without looming threats of war. From Dragonstone, Aegon watched these developments unfold, traveling when necessary to settle disputes or sign new decrees. He expanded the small administrative body he had established, drawing in learned men and women from across Westeros, scribes who understood each region's dialect and customs, maesters with expertise in commerce or agriculture, and knights who believed in forging peace through structure, not violence. This body began calling itself the Confederation Council, though Aegon still held the final word on interpreting the charter. He often felt uneasy with that much responsibility. He had no interest in becoming a High King in practice or name, yet so many men turned to him for final rulings that he wondered if he had unwittingly become the realm's center of gravity. Visenya, for her part, grew restless. She had wholeheartedly supported her brother's peaceful mission, yet she felt her role was limited to standing guard at negotiation tables. There were times she yearned to ride off and do something more direct, to quell a threat with the clarity of steel. She began organizing the seeds of a realm-wide watch, an order of roving guardians who would patrol roads and respond to crises under the Confederation's banner. She appointed knights of unquestioned loyalty from each region, forging a brotherhood that carried the ringed sigil. They traveled in small squads, wearing simple tabards, holding no allegiance to any single king, only to the Confederation. It was, in essence, the realm's first attempt at a cross-kingdom security force. Many lords regarded this idea with suspicion, as it placed armed men outside their direct command. But Visenya argued that these watchers would answer equally to all Confederation signatories, investigating banditry or lawless zones that local lords ignored. Over time, she persuaded key figures, especially those from the Vale and the Reach, that a neutral force was necessary to keep roads safe and to intervene if a local conflict flared beyond reason. Aegon agreed, seeing it as a logical extension of the Charter's mutual defense clause. Harren and Argilac, of course, sneered at the notion, claiming it was an intrusion. But the Watchers' presence gradually expanded, focusing first on trade routes that linked major cities. Merchants began praising these Watchers for reducing robberies. Common folk, too, felt a safer environment, though they often whispered that these Watchers answered to the silver-haired Targaryens and might one day become an army in all but name. Rumors flourished as they do in any changing world. As a year passed under this new order, Aegon realized that for the Confederation to remain stable, it needed more than laws and Watchers. It needed ties of blood and marriage among the major houses, forging personal bonds that transcended the old rivalries. Thus began a wave of betrothals that spanned the continent. Torrhen Stark had a daughter of marriageable age, and the Vale's regent, Queen Shara, hinted that she desired alliances to secure her young son's future. The Tyrells of Highgarden, acting as stewards for King Mern's extensive family, also showed interest in forging new ties. Even Loren Lannister had younger relatives who might wed strategic matches, bolstering the sense that the realm was no longer carved into hostile enclaves. Aegon himself, however, was subject to constant speculation. Some whispered that to cement House Targaryen's place, Aegon should propose to the daughter of a great house, perhaps a Stark or an Arryn or even a Lannister. Yet the Targaryens had their own customs, which historically included marriages within the family to keep the Valyrian bloodline pure. That tradition, however, had been anchored to the era of dragons, a time now past. Aegon felt uncertain. He respected the memory of Valyria, but he also believed that forging a new Westeros might require letting go of certain old ways. Visenya, who had always been more conservative in Targaryen customs, watched him grapple with the question. She had grown used to being called Aegon's heir in all but name, his partner in this grand project of reform, and the notion of him marrying a powerful lady from another house left her uneasy. She was no stranger to the idea that Targaryens wed Targaryens. Their family line was famously insular. Yet she sensed that Aegon was leaning toward a different path. She wrestled with her own loyalties, her sense of tradition, and her love for her brother that transcended the usual sibling bond. If the Targaryens no longer kept their bloodlines separate, what remained to mark them as special? This tension simmered quietly in private moments, though it never erupted into open conflict. Aegon, consumed by the day-to-day responsibilities of running a confederation, postponed the issue for as long as he could. He had no appetite for personal arrangements. Instead, he threw himself deeper into forging stability across the land. He wrote letters to the Iron Islands, still somewhat outside the Confederation's scope because their lord, Qhorin Valmark, had not explicitly signed the charter. The islands were nominally bound to Harren the Black at first, then to the Confederation by extension, but they often behaved independently. Aegon believed that if the Ironborn embraced the new order, raids on coastal villages might lessen. Yet the Iron Islanders cherished their way of reaving, an old tradition that conflicted starkly with the Confederation's ban on aggression. It was only a matter of time before a band of Ironborn, defying any notion of unity, launched a raid on a stretch of the Reach's coastline near the Shields. Reports reached Highgarden of pillaging and kidnapping. The outraged local lords demanded swift retribution. They appealed to Aegon and the Confederation. Loren Lannister voiced support for punitive measures. After all, trade ships from Lannisport risked Ironborn attacks as well. Argilac, ironically, seemed intrigued by the prospect of a fight, though he insisted he would only commit Stormland ships if the Confederation acted as one. Harren, on the other hand, had ties of old blood with the Iron Islands, as his forebears had once been Ironborn kings themselves, and so he remained oddly silent, not wanting to see them crushed. This presented a dilemma. The Confederation demanded a united response to external threats, but the Iron Islands were half inside, half outside, tangled with Harren's overshadowing presence. Aegon convened a special council at Riverrun, seen as a safer, more approachable seat than Harrenhal, to discuss how to handle the Ironborn raids. The lords arrived, each with strong opinions. The Riverlands had suffered centuries of Ironborn incursions before Harren built his monstrous castle, so they were eager to see the Isles reined in. The Reach lords demanded immediate naval action. Loren Lannister wanted some show of force but worried that an outright invasion of the Iron Islands might prove costly. Argilac practically salivated at the idea of a short, sharp war to discipline the Reavers. Brandon Stark, representing the North, pointed out that the Ironborn rarely ventured so far north, so the North's interest was more academic, but even he believed a punitive mission might deter future raids. Harren, seated at the table with arms crossed, listened to these arguments while maintaining a stony expression. Eventually, he spoke. The Iron Islands have traditions older than any of us. Their way of life involves reaving for plunder. If the Confederation tries to stamp that out entirely, you will provoke them to a perpetual state of rebellion. We cannot force them to yield so easily. Aegon turned his gaze on Harren. Would you allow them to raid Confederation coasts without consequence? I doubt the Lords of the Reach or the Westerlands will tolerate that. A subtle shrug of Harren's shoulders. I say we demand they pay Wergild the old price for the harm done and relinquish captives. If they refuse, then a limited blockade might teach them a lesson. But a full-scale invasion would be folly. The seas around the Iron Islands are treacherous, the men there are fierce in defense of their rocky shores. Argilac snorted. Fierce? Perhaps. But a unified navy from the Stormlands, the Reach, and the Westerlands could crush their longships. Let them try to hide in their rocks as we burn their harbors. Loren Lannister frowned, though not necessarily in disagreement. That might cause them to retaliate. We must weigh how far we are willing to push them. A blockade could work if we had enough ships. Brandon Stark spoke up, glancing at Aegon. Your Grace, or perhaps I should say mediator, apologies, old habits. Is there a possibility of negotiating with the Ironborn Lord? Directly offering them membership in the Confederation under certain conditions? If they abide by the no-raiding clause, we open them to new trade and resources that might ease their reliance on reaving. Aegon inclined his head in thought. They have always been resistant, but it may be worth a final attempt before we resort to violence. The Confederation was founded on the principle that war is the last resort. Argilac stirred restlessly in his seat as though offended by the notion of delaying a proper fight. But the other lords, including Loren and the Reach envoys, saw the logic in giving diplomacy a chance. Harren, for his part, seemed relieved not to plunge into a direct conflict, though he masked it behind a curt nod. Thus, the council resolved that Aegon would send official representatives to the Iron Islands, offering them full inclusion in the Confederation if they renounced their raiding practices and returned their captives from the recent raid. If they refused or continued their attacks, the combined fleets of the Stormlands, the Westerlands, and the Reach would blockade their shores until they submitted. It was a compromise that appealed to the Confederation's ethos, negotiation first, force if absolutely necessary. Aegon recruited a small group of envoys, including a son of House Hightower renowned for diplomacy and a seasoned sailor from House Valerion who understood the maritime ways better than most. They set sail from Lannisport toward the Iron Islands, carrying letters sealed with the Confederation's ringed emblem. It was a bold gambit. The Ironborn, with centuries of pillaging in their blood, might just as easily drown the envoys as greet them. But the mission had to be attempted. While Aegon waited anxiously for word of their reception, other matters demanded his attention. New farmland disputes in the northern marches, a brewing conflict between two lesser lords in the Vale over a mountain pass, and rumors that some in the Reach were scheming to expand their influence deeper into the Dornish marches. The realm's piece was an ever-shifting mosaic, each tile requiring careful placement so that the entire picture did not shatter. In one of those hectic weeks, as letters piled on his desk, Aegon received a missive from Shara Arryn, who asked for a private audience on a matter of great importance. She proposed that Aegon might consider wedding her son's aunt, a Lady Alice Arryn, a graceful woman in her early 20s with a reputation for piety and kindness. The letter extolled the potential bond such a marriage would forge between House Targaryen and House Arryn, deepening the Vale's commitment to the Confederation. Shara noted that Alice was strong of mind and constitution and would prove a faithful partner in building a peaceful realm. The letter was polite, but it clearly spelled out the advantages. House Targaryen would gain the Vale as a steadfast ally, the Vale would hold greater sway at the Confederation's Central Council, and the child of such a union would have a claim bridging both lines. This was the first formal marriage proposal Aegon had received since the Confederation's founding, and it would not be the last. He showed the letter to Visenya, who read it in silence, her face giving little away. Only after she set it aside did she speak, her voice measured. The Vale is a loyal ally. They've contributed heavily to the Confederation. A marriage tie would strengthen that bond. But are you inclined to it? Aegon rubbed his temples. I haven't met Lady Alice. I only know the Vale from Shara's regency. To marry for the realm's sake is one thing, but you know how Targaryens have wed among themselves in the past. Visenya's eyes flickered, a trace of the old Valyrian pride in them. I do. But we no longer have dragons, and we have chosen this path of binding Westeros together. Perhaps forging a union with a great house is a natural next step. Yet if you do this, it changes our house forever. He sighed. Everything changes. We can't cling to old ways if the realm itself is evolving. He studied her face, seeing conflicting emotions beneath her composed exterior. But I won't decide this lightly. Nor will I do it merely for politics. I should at least meet Lady Alice. See if she truly wished to be part of this confederation's leadership. Visenya nodded. Do as you must, brother. Just remember that our bond, as siblings and Targaryens, stands at the core of all we've done. Do not forget the legacy of Valyria entirely. They left it at that. Over the next few months, rumors circulated that Aegon Targaryen might soon wed. The potential bride changed depending on who told the story. Some said it was a Lannister cousin, others whispered it was a Tyrell maiden, still others insisted it was a Manderly lady from White Harbor. Aegon took no public stance, focusing on ensuring the realm's business proceeded. He did, however, accept Shara's invitation to visit the Vale again to meet Lady Alice in a casual setting. He traveled there with a small retinue, including Visenya, by ship around the northern coasts, then inland from Gulltown. The Vale in late spring was breathtaking, the sheer mountains draped with greenery, the sky crystal clear, the roads less treacherous than in winter. Aegon and Visenya arrived at the Gates of the Moon, then continued by mule up the dizzying switchbacks to the area itself. Shara Arryn greeted them graciously, with the boy King Ronald standing by her side. Alice Arryn was introduced soon after, a fair-haired woman with a quiet, earnest air. She greeted Aegon with courtesy, showing neither fawning admiration nor cold formality. She spoke with a soft voice, inquiring about the Confederation's progress, demonstrating some awareness of its complexities. Aegon found her thoughtful and well-read, though not one for grand displays. They spent a few days in mild conversation, walking along the Ares terraces, gazing at the distant world below. The Vale's regent skillfully arranged gatherings that let Aegon see Alice in different contexts, interacting with children, guiding the Ares steward on charitable allocations of grain, politely challenging a maester about historical records. Aegon felt a growing respect for her. If nothing else, she seemed genuinely dedicated to improving the lot of those under her care. Shara made no overt push, but her presence hovered like a gentle nudge in every corridor, reminding Aegon that such a union would be warmly welcomed. Visenya watched from the sidelines, her expression inscrutable. She conversed little with Alice, but she observed everything. Now and then, Aegon sensed the subtle tension in his sister, as though she weighed the cost of letting House Targaryen intertwine with another line. He thought of how they had relied on each other since youth, the last scions of a once mighty Valyrian bloodline, forging a new path for themselves and for Westeros. Yet even the mightiest traditions must bend in the wind of change, or risk snapping. On the fourth evening, as the last of the sun's light turned the peaks to molten gold, Aegon stood with Lady Alice on a high balcony. The air was crisp, wind tugging at their cloaks. He turned to her and asked quietly, "If there were no confederation, no politics, would you wish to marry a Targaryen?" She looked away, a faint smile touching her lips. "I can't say for certain. Perhaps, in another life, I would have chosen a simpler path. But I know what you and your sister have done for the realm. If there's a chance I can help sustain this peace by joining our houses, I will do so. I feel a calling to serve something greater than myself. That's not mere politeness. I've seen the cost of war and division. We have a chance to spare the next generation from that." Aegon studied her face, impressed by her candor. "I sense sincerity in your words. I won't pretend it's an easy choice for me or for my sister. But the realm does need strong bonds. I see you might be the right person to forge such a bond. May I ask if you truly wish it?" She breathed in deeply, letting the wind swirl her hair. "Yes. I do not fear the path ahead. If it means standing beside you and helping guide Westeros into this new era, I will gladly do it." He looked at her, feeling both gratitude and a flicker of guilt, knowing that part of him had clung to old Targaryen customs. "Then let us consider this betrothal. We will proceed carefully, speak with our families, ensure my sister's blessing. But I believe it could serve the realm in ways beyond measure." So it was that when Aegon departed the Vale, rumors of an impending betrothal gained real substance. He had given Shara Aaron a preliminary acceptance subject to final negotiations about dowry, wedding location, and confederation protocols. Visenya remained silent throughout the return journey, watching the mountains recede behind them. Only when they boarded the ship at Gulltown did she speak. She is gracious, intelligent enough, and gentle. You could do worse, brother. He glanced at Visenya, catching the faint note of resignation. I value your counsel above all, he said softly. If you think this unwise— No, she interrupted, her voice tight. It's not unwise. It is the future we shaped. I'm only remembering the past, what we lost to Valyria. But let it be so. He reached for her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. There was a bond between them that no marriage could sever, but he sensed that some distance was opening. Perhaps that was inevitable. The tides of time moved without mercy. Upon returning to Dragonstone, Aegon found the envoys to the Iron Islands had sent a raven from Old Wyke, the seat of one of the Ironborn priestly orders. Their message described tense negotiations with Lord Corin Valmark and several captains. The Ironborn were divided. Some saw the Confederation as a chance to secure trade alliances and new markets, while others scorned it as an abomination that would end their cherished reavings. The priests of the drowned god demanded that the Ironborn remain true to their creed of paying the iron price for wealth. Yet the envoys reported slight optimism that a compromise might be reached if the Confederation offered the Iron Islands certain fishing rights and assistance with strengthening their local infrastructure, harbors, ropewalks, etc., to transition away from pure raiding. However, the Reavers insisted they would not yield captives or abandon reaving entirely without a strong show of respect from the Confederation. Aegon's brow furrowed as he read the letter. Helping the Iron Islands modernize to reduce their reliance on reaving was plausible, but how to address the matter of captives, some from the most recent raid, but others from years past? It was a moral test. The Confederation had vowed to protect the people of Westeros from such depredations, but the Ironborn had never cared for moral arguments. They saw raiding as their birthright. If the Confederation caved too much, the Lords of the Reach and Westerlands would be furious. If they demanded the immediate return of all captives, the Ironborn might scuttle negotiations. Aegon decided to consult with the leading Confederation members by Raven, hoping for a consensus on how far they were willing to compromise. As these negotiations swirled, life in Westeros continued at a brisk pace. Markets prospered, travelers moved more freely, and a sense of cautious optimism began to seep through many corners. Minstrels composed ballads about Aegon's improbable unification, though they often embellished the story with romantic or heroic flourishes that made him sound like a sorcerer weaving a spell. Despite the many squabbles, no armies marched against each other, and the memory of violent clashes faded just a little. Lords who once sharpened swords now sharpened their wits, seeking advantage through commerce and alliances rather than conquest. In this shifting landscape, Aegon noticed new voices rising. Younger lords and knights who had never known open war, who questioned the old heroic ideal of battlefield glory. Some had grown enamored of the Confederation's notion of a realm bound by law. In a generation or two, that might become the norm. Aegon often wondered whether his role would become obsolete, a mediator unnecessary in a stable system. Perhaps that was the ultimate success, to make oneself irrelevant by creating a realm that ran on cooperation. Yet he did not grow complacent. He knew that one spark of discontent in a powerful lord's heart could still set the realm ablaze. Harren and Argilac remained prickly. The Iron Islands threatened discord from without. And somewhere beyond the Red Mountains, Dorne still stood aloof. Indeed, Dorne had never formally joined the Confederation, though some Dornish lords traded with the Reach and the Stormlands. The ruling Martells watched from Sunspear, uninterested in signing a charter that might compromise their independence. For the moment, they were not openly hostile, and the Confederation was too busy with internal matters to focus on Dorne. But Aegon suspected that sooner or later, the question of Dorne's place in this new order would surface. Autumn arrived, painting the realm with russet and gold. A raven came from the Iron Islands envoys, bearing news that a moderate faction among the Ironborn was ready to sign a limited treaty. They would cease raids on Confederation shores if certain conditions were met: recognition of the Old Way's sanctity on their home isles, the right to keep thralls already taken unless ransom was paid, and a promise to respect Ironborn autonomy on matters of succession and religion. However, they refused to release captives from the last raid, demanding hefty ransoms. The Lords of the Reach balked at this. Aegon consulted them, trying to find a middle ground. Ultimately, the Confederation insisted that all captives from the last raid must be returned free of ransom as a gesture of good faith, or the blockade threat would be renewed. The Ironborn negotiators balked. The lines hardened again. With tensions rising, Argilac campaigned loudly for a show of force, claiming that a swift naval expedition would cow the Ironborn. Loren Lannister, remembering the cost of any protracted siege or blockade, hesitated but did not dismiss the idea. Mern's heirs were divided. Some wanted to uphold the principle of no ransom, others were willing to compromise for peace. Aegon stood in the middle, determined to uphold the Charter's moral stance that reaving was outlawed. Yet he dreaded the possibility of plunging Westeros into war over this standoff. Once blood was spilled, old instincts might awaken. The Confederation's stability hung on a knife's edge. Visenya, seeing her brother's strain, proposed a personal approach. Aegon himself could sail to the Iron Islands, present the Confederation's demands in person, and show that he was willing to parley face-to-face, while also bringing enough war galleys to demonstrate the realm's might. Such a bold move might either shock the Ironborn into acquiescence or provoke a direct confrontation. But it would show that the Confederation was serious. After consultation with Loren Lannister, who agreed to lend some of the Westerland's ships, and the Reach's admirals, who offered a small fleet, Aegon began to consider the plan. Perhaps a personal visit with a squadron of Confederation warships behind him could force a resolution without full-scale carnage. Before finalizing this course, Aegon received more pressing news from the north, rumors of unrest in the territories just south of the Wall, where certain clans stirred in response to a wildling chieftain breaching the Wall with a band of followers. The Night's Watch, diminished in numbers over the decades of relative peace, struggled to contain the incursion. Torrhen Stark's men were on alert and the North requested additional resources. Aegon faced a dilemma. If he diverted men and attention to the north, the blockade threat on the Iron Islands might lose momentum. But ignoring the North's plight would be a betrayal of the Confederation's promise. He summoned the Confederation Council, this time on Dragonstone itself, as it was more central for maritime travel. Loren Lannister arrived by ship, Argilac by another, the Reach's delegation by a third. The Vale sent a high-ranking envoy, and Torrhen Stark traveled south with a small retinue, a rare journey for the king in the north. The great lords convened in Dragonstone's High Hall with the sea wind howling outside. It was reminiscent of earlier gatherings, but the stakes felt higher, the realm's commitments tested on multiple fronts. Torrhen Stark, lean and gray at the temples, spoke first. I ask this council to uphold the Confederation's vow of mutual defense. The Night's Watch stands guard on the Wall, but they are but few. If a wildling threat penetrates deep into our lands, the small folk will suffer. We require more manpower and supplies, at least until the immediate threat is quelled. Argilac retorted, we have an Ironborn crisis at hand. Our ships are preparing to sail west. We cannot be in two places at once. Loren Lannister, arms folded over a gilded doublet, weighed in. The north is far from the Iron Islands, and many of us see no direct threat there. But the Confederation's principle is clear, an attack on one is an attack on all. If we do not send some measure of aid to the Night's Watch, we undermine our own charter. Brandon Stark, who stood beside his king, nodded. My brother does not ask for a massive army. A small, disciplined force of trained men combined with supplies will suffice to reinforce the Watch until the wildling incursion ends. Mern's representative, a younger cousin of the aging king, tried to broker a compromise. We could raise a small expedition from the north, the Vale, and perhaps a portion of the Crownlands or Riverlands to address the wildlings. Meanwhile, the Stormlands, Westerlands, and the Reach maintain the threat of blockade or direct naval action against the Iron Islands. Let us not overcommit all our resources to one problem. Aegon listened, weighing the suggestions. At length, he spoke with quiet authority. Two crises, two responses. The Iron Islands are more pressing for the southwestern half of the realm, the wildlings for the north. The Confederation is large enough to handle both if we divide responsibilities. King Torrhen, you shall receive a contingent from the Vale. Shara Aaron has signaled readiness to send knights, and from the Riverlands, led by Lord Tully, to bolster the Wall. That should suffice for now. Meanwhile, I will lead a Confederation fleet to the Iron Islands, accompanied by forces from the Westerlands, the Reach, and the Stormlands. We will attempt a final negotiation in person. If they refuse to free their captives and cease raids, we implement a naval blockade. If they resist violently, we respond in kind. That is the path. Are we agreed? Though there was some grumbling and crosstalk, no one offered a viable alternative. Argilac sneered a bit at the idea of more waiting, but he relished the chance to finally do something decisive. Heron sat silent. He had come, but he rarely spoke in these councils anymore, as though resigned to the fact that his outnumbered voice carried little sway. Eventually, an accord was reached. The Confederation would split its forces, simultaneously honoring its promise to the north while confronting the Ironborn threat. Within weeks, Aegon set sail from Lannisport at the head of a fleet of 24 ships, mostly Westerland's vessels with the Golden Lion or the Confederation's ring banner snapping in the wind, plus a few from the Reach, easily identified by their green sails. The Stormlands contributed 6 stout war galleys. Aegon himself sailed on a ship from House Valerion, whose seahorse banner had long graced the waters near Dragonstone. Visenya accompanied him, commanding a small retinue of the Watchers she had trained, men loyal to the Confederation alone. They cut across the open sea toward the Iron Islands, the horizon a slate-gray line. The weather grew capricious, with sudden squalls typical of those waters. As they neared Pike, they spied the forbidding silhouettes of great stone keeps perched on jagged rocks, connected by swaying rope bridges. Around them, smaller lumps of land jutted from the sea. The air tasted of salt and distant thunder. Ironborn longships were visible in the distance, their lean profiles hugging the waves. Aegon ordered the Confederation fleet to anchor in a loose semicircle well within sight of Pike's ramparts, but not so close that they could be easily rammed or boarded. A single longboat from the flagship carried Aegon, Visenya, and a handful of envoys toward the main island, where Lord Corin Valmark supposedly held council. It was an unnerving approach, for the Ironborn Watchers on the cliffs looked down with unreadable intentions. They landed on a rocky shore, battered by waves. The Ironborn had gathered, a ragged assembly of captains and priests, their hair stiff with salt, their expressions grim. The drowned men among them wore seaweed draped around their shoulders, muttering prayers to their brine lord. Aegon stepped forward, displaying neither arrogance nor timidity. He introduced himself as the mediator of the Westeros Confederation, come to treat with Lord Valmark as agreed. One of the captains sneered, "You bring warships to our home and speak of peace? You must think us fools." Visenya's eyes narrowed. "We bring ships to demonstrate the Confederation's resolve. It was your raids on our shores that violated peace. We are here to end this cycle." Lord Corin Valmark